What's up, guys? I wanted to make this quick video to answer a lot of the questions I've been getting about the coronavirus. And I know a lot of people are scared, and I wanted to take some information from a scientific point of view and present it because I think that's what's missing in the current discussion about it. And although there are definitely certain risks and precautions we need to take, at the end of the day, this virus is not behaving any differently than previous coronaviruses or pandemics that we've seen. And I'm going to show that to you with some data from the CDC and WHO. So I titled this 13 Questions Answered in 13 Minutes on March 13th because everything kind of lined up that way. So these are the questions that I've been getting. These are the most common questions that people have, and we're going to answer them step by step, and I hope this is helpful. So, question number one, who should I listen to? I feel very strongly about this, especially at a time like this. You have to be very careful who or what you listen to. And I follow some work by Ray Dalio, who's the author of Principles and the founder of Bridgewater and a multi billionaire. And he has a very good guideline for distinguishing between believable people and non believable people. And what that is instead of just listening to what somebody tells you about the coronavirus or what they believe or what their opinion is or what their fears are, it's much better to listen deeper for how they're arriving at those conclusions and how they're reasoning and what evidence they're basing that opinion on. And I hope by the end of this, you'll see that I'm just basing this talk on the evidence that we have so far from the CDC, the WHO, and the tracker by Johns Hopkins University. These are the sources that I definitely, absolutely shut off and do not listen to at all at a time like this for reasons that we're all aware of, but sometimes have a hard time following. And that is that these news sources are running a business, and they're in the business of getting viewership and reads and clicks. So they're going to market and spin their words in a way that manipulate human emotions and get you into an emotional state where you'll continue to listen or click or buy, and that's how they make money. So enough said about that. I actually find it very cool and interesting to look at the structure of what we're talking about and drill it down to the basic science rather than just get caught up in emotions and a whirlwind of theories and ideas. The coronavirus has this glycoprotein structure, and it has this glycoprotein capsule, which is on the envelope of it. And that's why it's named the coronavirus, because the Latin word for crown is corona. And I guess some geeky scientists somewhere looked under the electron microscope and saw that it had these spikes on it and thought, oh, it looks like a crown. And that's how things get named in medicine, and that's how a lot of things in medicine come about in terms of terminology. And on a more relatable level, you guys can basically think of it like this Corona logo for those of you that like to drink that kind of stuff. One myth I want to dispel is that coronavirus is not something new or mysterious, and a lot of the news outlets are using those words, but the fact is that coronavirus has been around for a long time. We've known about it for at least 50 years. It mostly existed in animals and mammals until about 20 years ago, when it began to infect the human population, causing some forms of the common cold or flu. Now, for those of you that are a little bit more advanced, I agree with you that this particular strain of coronavirus is not the same as the one that has caused common colds, and we're going to address that in a few minutes. But again, you have to really break it down to the science and look at the structure. And what we do know about the coronavirus is it has these glycoprotein capsules on it, which allow it to adhere to cell membranes. And coronaviruses are known in the literature to have some of the largest genomes out of all the viruses. Uh, Viruses do not have DNA, they actually have RNA for the most part. And coronavirus has an RNA makeup. And the fact that it has a larger genome actually doesn't matter. It's just a fun fact. When we look at the size of it, it's about 140 nanometers, so very tiny. How does it work? This is just basically to show you that it attaches to cells and then either injects its RNA or the entire virus itself gets taken up into the cell where it does its work. How is it different from other viruses? We really need to keep in mind that we've seen other coronavirus epidemics or pandemics in the last 20 years. The first one you may remember was called SARS, and that was in 2002. And that was actually a coronavirus that had 8,000 cases and 800 deaths with a 10% mortality. There was also the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, MERS, in 2012. That one had much fewer cases but was extremely deadly and had a 37% mortality. And then the one we're dealing with now initially was called SARS coronavirus 2 because it resembled the SARS in 2002. They renamed it to coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID 19, so you'll see that terminology in certain places. So far, as of this morning, March 13, 2020, we have this many cases and this many deaths for a 3 to 4% mortality. So, what we do know is that the mortality of this is much more benign than previous coronaviruses that we've seen past. Here's just a plot of the last two coronaviruses as well as the last pandemic of a virus that we've seen, which was 2009, the H1N1 flu. That flu had many more cases, about 60 million, but much fewer deaths. The SARS and MERS pandemics or epidemics had fewer cases but had a higher mortality rate. So coronavirus is somewhere in between these three. This is just to alleviate a lot of the anxiety about the mortality rate. It is actually much lower than other coronaviruses that we've seen in recent history. You may have heard of this seafood market in the province in China where they were selling raw seafood and probably also certain strange animals such as bats. And it's believed, based on the genetic makeup of this virus, that some Chinese person probably ate a bat or other strange animal from this seafood market and then got coronavirus and then subsequently transmitted it to other people in his region. And then it quickly, because of many different factors, due to globalization and travel and trade, spread throughout the world to cause the pandemic that we're in now. Let's talk about the symptoms of coronavirus. What I want you to know is that these symptoms are not any different than the regular common cold, cough, or flu. So just like if you don't have these symptoms, you would never think to yourself that I have a flu or a cold. In the same way, if you don't have these symptoms, you probably do not have the coronavirus. How does it spread? Again, the same exact way as the common cold or flu. Aerosolized droplets containing the virus from saliva or other bodily fluids, or coughing or sneezing, then can get into your respiratory system or your eyes, and then you can get the virus that way. It can also spread from contact. So if you touch a surface or shake somebody's hand and that has viral particles on it, and then you touch your mouth or your nose or your eyes, you can transmit the virus to yourself. So the precautions that you take are going to be the same as for the common cold. Now, one thing that's going around is that this virus is spreading faster than we've ever seen in history. It's just not true, and we don't know for sure. It's just too early to tell what the transmission rate of the virus is. But scientifically, we measure this with something called a basic reproduction number, and that's something you should know about. And that is basically saying for each individual that has the virus, how many other people are they going to probably infect? For the common cold or flu, it averages about 1.28. And as of now, this data is still being collected. It looks like the transmission rate for this virus is between 1.4 and 3.9, which puts it in the range of SARS, which we saw back in 2002. And it's a much smaller number than we've seen with other viruses in human history. Most of you know this, but just to go over it again, the best way to protect yourself is the same way you would protect yourself from someone that is sick from the cold or flu. The only caveat here is if you're listening to this and you are elderly or sick or immunocompromised, the rules of the game are different for you. So a lot of the stuff I've said doesn't apply to you, and you will know this, you will need to take extra precautions, avoid people, avoid public gatherings, and really quarantine yourself. But I'm addressing this talk to more of a healthy, younger population, and you just basically need to follow regular precautions. Now, let's just say, absolute worst case scenario, that you get the virus somehow. What's going to happen? Are you going to die? Not really. Probably nothing will happen. 80% of people recover from the disease just fine without any treatment whatsoever. It's only a small percentage of people, and again, it's the people that are sick or have other underlying medical problems that can develop a serious illness such as pneumonia and respiratory distress. Do antibiotics work for viruses? No, they do not. The mechanism of the antibiotic is not going to be able to take down the virus. We don't have very many good antivirals, and we don't have good vaccines against viruses. As those of you that know that have gotten the flu vaccine, you still get the flu. Just yesterday, the WHO announced that this was officially a pandemic, and a lot of people went into pandemonium over that. Just want you to know that the definition of a pandemic is a disease that occurs worldwide, crossing international boundaries, and the key feature of a pandemic is this simultaneous rapid transmission between a large number of people. The coronavirus was already a pandemic before they announced it. It was just an official announcement that they made, but technically it was already a pandemic. So them announcing a pandemic does not mean that they are suddenly upgrading this virus to being any more dangerous or risky than we already knew that it was. Being a pandemic has nothing to do with the severity or riskiness of the virus. It's just simply a definition to describe what is happening across the world. By the way, we've all lived through a pandemic every single year. It's called the flu. The flu is technically a pandemic. The only reason they don't announce it as such is because it doesn't have that very rapid transmission simultaneously across a large population. The flu typically occurs across several months during the winter. In the last century or so, we've survived 4 different pandemics. And again, as you can see from these numbers, in the early 1900s, it caused 50 million deaths, up to 1 million deaths. But really, in the modern era, the pandemic we've seen most recently is the H1N1 flu, and that caused about 12,000 deaths. So if we look at the life cycle of these pandemics, because that's really the best way to predict how this pandemic will behave, you have this initial acceleration phase where there's a large number of cases, which grows rapidly, and then a deceleration phase where it decreases and then it basically goes out of existence and just becomes dormant. Based on the way this coronavirus, is behaving so far, there's no reason to believe that it will not follow this graph for this time as well. Right now, I estimate that we're about here in the phase, although I cannot say for sure. Nobody knows where we are in the phase, but we're probably somewhere in the acceleration phase, and which means that at some point it will peak and then decrease. I personally believe that this peak and decrease is going to happen much faster than normal because of the extreme measures that people are taking. So in one sense, panic is not good, but in another sense, it's helping us because it's helping us to contain the virus much faster than we normally would. And that's due to social media and the availability of news being disseminated widely. But long and short, should I panic? No, you should not. If you're a healthy, average person, your risk of getting it is extremely low, and that is according to the CDC. Even in the worst case scenario that a person does contract it, like Tom Hanks or someone, I don't know what his medical status is, but assuming he's healthy, the risk of having any consequences is even lower. At the same time, it's understandable and okay to feel scared. I would just suggest that you get your facts from reliable sources and not the mainstream news media. And those reliable sources to me are the CDC, the WHO, and institutions like Johns Hopkins. I think taking regular precautions like you normally would if a lot of people had the flu, in other words, washing your hands, staying away from sick people, is a very good thing. There's been a recent trend of stopping and canceling large gatherings, which in and of itself is probably an overreaction, but at the end of the day, it's going to help us because it's really going to contain the virus in a way that is unprecedented in human history. The bottom line is based on the mechanics and the biology of the virus so far that we know this is an absolutely controllable pandemic. It will decrease and go into dormancy, assuming there's no random mutation or some fluke. And I think the silver lining of all the panic is that because we are taking such extreme precautions to prevent transmission, it's going to help to decrease the life cycle of this pandemic. There's no evidence that this virus is behaving any differently, and the only difference is our response to it, which I think is a good thing. Take care, guys. Stay safe, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Just DM me or send me a message. Take care.